Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're gonna work a little bit on the coloring techniques, and in the other video I showed you a little bit about the different papers that you can use and that are included in here and what else is on the market that you might want to try. As you can see here, there's a whole bunch of more flowers and images and leaves, and I will continue to color some of these in and post them online. But for the purpose of this video and just to show you a little bit about the possibilities of these markers, I used just this image here. And as you can see, watercolor pencils are like watercolor, so they give you a very soft shading, and you can achieve a little bit darker color with either darker colored pencils, or when you layer them on top, or you go over them a couple of times. But in between, make sure to let these dry, as I mentioned before, because no paper likes to go wet on wet on wet, beside the watercolor paper, which is specifically made for it, but most papers don't appreciate when you go over, so just let it dry in between. Now, we tested out these the last time, and I showed you a little bit the differences between those papers. And so the differences not only is the color, so they're not plain white, but as I showed you up close, the watercolor papers are a little bit rougher in texture, and they're way thicker than your regular basic cardstock. And I will show you a couple things here, so never mind that I already did a little bit of coloring, but I wanted to show you, now that they're dry, how these colors behave. So they're really smooth, they're really light, it's more like a wash. And remember, we had an orange, we had the early espresso, and we used the Coastal Cabana. So these were the three colors. And as you can see, they're really, really light. But that is the purpose of a watercolor pencil. So it's more watercolor, it's a little bit less intense. Now, for the stamping, I thought today I'm gonna use just a couple of objects to show you a little bit the differences. So this is from the Storybook Garden patch, and we're gonna use the watering can, those stack of pots. And then I think I used a carrot here. I also stamped the little strawberries, but I think we're gonna focus on these three. Now, when it comes to stamping, as you can see here, so this is the watercolor paper that comes in the pack. This is the cardstock, regular white, basic white cardstock. And as you can see here, there are pretty nice images that you can stamp with. While when you're looking at the watercolor images, so they're a little bit rougher. The texture is not, the outlines are not as smooth as they were when you stamp them on regular cardstock. And this is simply because of the texture of the paper. And as I mentioned, you will always have issues when you have a stamp that has a very detailed image, or it's a very fine, like say lettering, you know, your words phrase stamping, and you stamp directly on watercolor paper. The likelihood is that your stamped image will a little bit fuzzy, or not quite as crisp as it would be when you're stamping on regular cardstock. This being said, I used Memento ink for all of these stamped images. So this is the ink that I used, and this is water-based, which means when you add water to this one, this will smudge. And you can see a little bit in this example here, when I got a little bit too much water, how the black actually kind of is dissolving a little bit here. And one thing you can prevent this from happening is when you use Stays On ink. Now, I'm not a big fan of Stays On ink, but if you are desperate and you need to stamp on watercolor paper because you want to color it in with watercolor, use Stays On ink, because then you can avoid having these issues here. The other thing that you should keep in mind is watercolor paper is thicker and it needs a lot more water to move color around. And I will show you this on, or we're gonna test this on this one. This here is the Stampin' Up! Fluid 100 watercolor paper from Stampin' Up! And as you can see, I did two things with this one. I did color in the entire pots, so I didn't leave any highlights or anything. I just colored the entire thing in and then use water to smooth it out. And as you can see here, some of the black is bleeding, and overall it's a pretty flat image. The way I colored them in was on purpose, but this issue, no matter how what technique we later use, this is an issue that will consistently stay there, because every time you go over black, if it's just stamped in Memento with water, it will melt. So just keep that in mind. If you want to use watercolor paper, you should stamp in a non-water based ink, which in this case Memento is not good. Also our regular stamps, these are water based too, and it tells you right on top here, so these will not work either. So you need something like StazOn that will stay permanently on there. Okay, now the second thing I did here, and as you can see, so this is the other watercolor paper, and this is the Stampin' Up! Basic white cardstock. Now if you want to use the regular cardstock for this technique, you can. I would suggest, instead of the basic white, use the thicker white or the white willow, because they're a little bit thicker in material, and I think that will work a little bit better than just a plain white, but I wanted to show you that this will work too. Okay, now as you can see here, I did not color in the entire object, and simply because when you're thinking about something that you see, like a round object or any object that you see in the light, you will always have a lighter and a darker side depending on where the light hits it. Now in my case, I assume that my light is coming from the top here, right here. So that means to me is that the rim, for example, in the top of this watering can is a lot lighter than, for example, the sides. They will be a little bit more in the shadow, so they will be a little bit darker. And then I have a highlight going all the way on the front here as well, which gives you the illusion when we later add water to it that this is the lightest point, so it gives you the illusion of a round object. Well, when you color everything in one color, and even this one here has a little highlight, but if this is one color, you can see here it is very flat, and once we add color to this one, you will see the difference, what I mean by that. The other thing is too, like I said, watercolor pencils, you can tell by the way they behave when you put them on the paper. So I use the same pressure on both sides, but you can already see how much smoother this area is here on the smooth cardstock than compared to the rougher surface of the watercolor paper. So that is another thing you should keep in mind depending on what paper you're using. But for our paintings kit, I'm gonna color this in too and show you later how this will work. But just so you see, if you have a little bit of, you leave a little bit of a highlight, or just in general, you leave a little bit of white here and there. Don't go all the way to the edge. Leave a little bit white. It's totally fine, like the tip of the green here. You don't have to color everything in, because what happens if you color everything in, it just looks flat. It doesn't have any interest, and you go like, well, this doesn't really look like anything, you know, not like I intended to. So make sure you leave a little bit of a highlight. And then again, when we add some water to it, and I'm just gonna use this brush here because it is a little bit smaller, thinner on the tip, so I don't get too much water. Now this is watercolor paper, so this can absorb a lot of water, but remember I stamped with the regular ink, So when I pull this out, I'm trying to stay away from the black edge. And as you can see here, I mixed two colors on top. So since I don't have gray, remember we were limited with our colors here. I don't have gray, but I do have a brown and I have a blue. So I just went right on top. I used the early espresso, and I just did a little bit line on here, and I will show you in a second how this works. And then I went over with the blue, the Coastal Cabana, and those two together turn into like a tin type of gray. So even if you don't have the color, you can always mix them. So here we try to keep it light, and as you see, I still haven't added more water to it. Inside the watering can, on the other hand, this is pretty dark in here, so we might have to go in here later to add a little bit water, more color, but this I want to be really dark, even so the sun hits it or the light hits it, but this inside here is gonna be darker. So there we have one. Let's try our pot here. And you can see how the two colors, this case the same thing. So I didn't really have a terracotta color, but we had the brown, the early espresso, and we did have an orange. So I just laid them on top of each other. And as you can see, I don't even have to add color to the entire piece. There is enough pigment in here that I can stretch this out towards the center, which makes the edges nice and dark, and the center I leave it a little bit lighter. And they can all be a little bit different. They don't have to be even. Nothing is just one color, not even in nature. So here we go. And I try to stay away from the stamped image, which for the most part I think I got pretty good. So as you can see here, this is our watercolor, so we have a little bit of a highlight. Now compared to this one, where I colored in everything evenly, there is a little bit of a difference, and you can fine tune this. You can go over the edges a little bit more, a little bit darker, but this one here is very flat. The watering can, I think, shows it the best. You can see already where the artist left a little bit of shading for us, but you can see the difference between having it all in one color, so when you color in the entire image, or when you just do the edges and leave a little bit white in the center. Our little carrot, we can do the same thing, just pulling the color from the sides a little bit to the center here, and we leave it with a little bit light and dark. And this is the green, which I just applied really lightly, and I too leave that white edge around the leaves. I don't mind. That makes it look way more realistic than when it's just in one color. I mean, even here you still see a little bit of the color, but a little bit of the white, but it's mostly one color. So just one color makes an image flat. If you have light and dark and little shades, that makes it a lot more interesting. Now let's use our watercolor paper that came with the set. And like I showed you before, let's start with the watering can. So I don't have gray, and in order to get something that looks like gray, you can mix a blue and a brown together, which gives you a little bit of a gray tone. And before you start, take a little bit of a piece of scrap paper and make sure that you're not coloring with the sharp tip of the pencil. Make sure you have a flat, and if you don't, just color a little bit so you have a flat piece to color in. That way you avoid getting harsh lines too, because sometimes those edges can be sharp and then you have some really hard time smoothing these out. So we want to use a nice smooth edge. And then all I did was I used the watering can and I'm just coloring in from the side here, and not even halfway, and where I want this to be a little bit darker. And then I go from the other side and I do the same thing. And it doesn't have to be a straight line, so make sure it's like, can be like this one, a little bit raggedy. It's underneath this rim here. Okay, and then we do these two things, those little rings. And then, like I said, on top here, I really just want a light color, but inside here, I want this to be really dark. So I'm actually gonna color in the entire thing dark this time. Now for the watering, I'm just gonna go down here this edge, because again, remember the light comes from here, so it hits this top here. So this top of this arm is gonna be lighter. This part gonna be lighter. Underneath here it's gonna be darker. Here it's gonna be darker. So I'm just emphasizing those areas that are usually darker, and then I will pull the color from there into the lighter area. So same here, and I make it a little bit more obvious for you so it shows up on camera a little bit better. Okay, and now I just use the Coastal Cabana, and again I'm making sure I have a smooth edge, and now I'm just going right on top of this brown here, and you can see it already kind of looks grayish, but I'm just gonna go right on top here. Let me do a little bit lighter here. And in this part. And I know this looks weird. I think we need a little bit more brown here. But you can already see that this looks a little bit more 3D and not as flat. Now for our terracotta pots, I'm making sure I'm gonna have a flat, there we are, a flat pencil, and I'm gonna try to avoid, if you want to do little circles, that's fine, but make sure you get this a little bit zigzaggy into the center here. And you don't want to go crisscross everywhere, because this just doesn't look good later. So it's going to be darker under here. So here we have a little light. This one is a little bit darker. Then these rings here are a little bit lighter. And here, same thing. Now we take our brown and we go over the orange. And once we add the water to it, those two colors will smooth together. And we get a little bit lighter terracotta type. So in those areas, like where I said right here, where I think this is going to be darker, I'm just adding a little bit more brown here, while the other ones stay lighter. And I think that's good. Now we take our brush and I'm making sure it's not super wet. And then I'm just gonna pull out the color from the bottom up. And I only do this once and then I leave it, so I don't go over again. Even so, there are stamped images right here, but this is just a little bit of water, so it shouldn't affect your stamped image too much. And the other thing is, when you stamp it, let it sit overnight so it's really nice and dry. I'm just making sure that I don't have a lot of water on here, and so you can, from the darker to the lighter, if you feel like you get too much color on here, you just wipe it off. And then we do the same here. And this is an old tin watering can, so it has some spots that are lighter, some are more used. And then we go in here where these little rivets are, and for the inside you can see I'm just gonna activate how this color moves together, and it really is dark in here. And now we just do our little handle, same thing. And that's how I would leave it. And if you look from further away, it looks like it is watercolored in. It has some highlights. It's not all flat, just one surface, and it just looks more realistic. And the same as with this one here. So let's start by moving out one side and then the other. And then we just go in here and smooth this out a little bit. This is the watercolor piece from our kit. So this is watercolor, so we can go over this a little bit more. But if I feel like it's getting too wet, I'm just waiting until it's dry to add more. So now here, this was the little bit darker area where I added more brown. So it looks a little bit different. And here we do too. And as you can see, I work in sections. So I go from one section to the next. I'm not going this way. I'm always working with the design or with the stamped image. Okay, and here we have it. There's a white rim. If this bothers you, we can add a little bit later, but let's let this dry. And to show you, so these are the three things. This was the one that was colored in completely. Here this is watercolor paper where we left a little bit, and it's dry now. And then this one is the watercolor paper that comes in the kit. And now we're doing the same thing with our cardstock. And again, I already colored all this for us. But I want to do a little bit deeper color in here. So we're going to do a little bit here and maybe a little bit more here of the blue. All right, now for the cardstock, I make sure that my brush is really just damp, because I don't want this to go right into the paper. I just want to pull the color from the colored image out here. And as you can see, if you don't use a lot of water, you still can use the same technique. And like I said, I would use the cardstock that is a little bit thicker, because it doesn't absorb your color as fast as this one does right now. I can tell here that the water seeps in very quickly. but I show you an example in a second where I used regular cardstock and the same technique where it doesn't seep in as fast. So here you can tell. So we need to move this a little bit. And here we have our and it might not look like anything you want right now, but we just let it dry and then we can go over it again. Like this one is pretty dry now, and it looks like we need a little bit more water to move this around. And if you need to, you can always go in and dip some off, but otherwise I would leave this way. So this one's still drying, and let me show you. So here I used a little bit thicker cardstock compared to the little bit thinner one. So like I said, stepping up the thicker basic white. And I did the same coloring technique, and you can see every time you use this, it looks different. But you can see how just a little bit of a difference, like the inside where it's a shadow, the outside makes it just look a little bit more round. And like I said, if you're somebody who this white bothers you and you don't want this to be white, but now you have it already colored in and you would like to give it a little bit more color, what you could do too is, I'm just do I have a strip of, let's use this one here. You can put on a bunch of color in here, and then we do a bunch of color blue. So this one is, I pressed really hard, and then I'm just mixing them together here, and then I can use whatever I have here on my brush and add a little bit to it if I think that I need to smooth this out a little bit more. Now we have to let it dry again, and as I told you before, you can also use a little bit of water, pick up directly from your brush, with your brush from your pencil, and then use this to add more color to it. The only problem you have here is that you have to be careful once you take a lot of color off here, so your pencils will get softer on the tip here. And when I do this technique, I really have to let them sit and dry before I use them again, because when you use them, they're more like a wax type. You can tell when you're coloring, all of a sudden it feels wet. So make sure if once you grab color from the tip of these pencils that you let them dry and not use them again. So you can fill in if this really bothers you, but I still would leave a little bit white here and there just to make it look more realistic. Down here, for example, you know what, that could use a little bit more color maybe. So let's pick up a little bit of the orange and a little bit more of the brown, and I'm starting from this side here, adding a little bit more color, moving it in here. See how it gets darker just by doing that a little bit. Then you can add a little bit more here. Then I have to hold it up a little bit because the light shines on it, and then you just let it dry. And you will be amazed every time you come back and your painting looks totally different than, you know, what you thought it should look like. So the same thing is here with our nature paintings paper. So I can just pick up a little bit more of this and maybe go over this a little bit more, and then just use the edge and do a little bit darker wash down here. But remember, I stamped this in Memento ink, so I don't want to go too much more over it here. So now this one is a little bit darker and we can let it dry. So I will put a couple of still shots on here after this is completely dry. So as you can see, you have a whole bunch of different possibilities with your watercolor pencils, and depending on the medium that you pick, so if it's a regular cardstock or if it is watercolor paper, the outcome will be a little bit different. So I would say for beginners, use the watercolor paper because this just gives you a little bit more time and you can use a little bit more water without having to worry about paper falling apart on you. And other than that, you can use regular cardstock. Make sure it's a little bit thicker, and when you stamp it, just make sure you're staying away from most of the outlines. So if you see on this one here, I used water on both of them. So this was the one that we just did together. This one I showed you how the color flows on a little bit thicker cardstock. So as you can see, those images that I stamped did not really run. They didn't smudge. Like here where I had to add more water to it, you can see on the edge here and on top here. But these ones stay pretty true. So the less water you use, the better it is, and you still can see how the colors are flowing. And it gives you a softer, more natural look, not like your markers or, you know, the alcohol markers, because they are just, you know, brighter. But overall, I think these kits are really a great way to start practicing and just playing around with them a little bit. And with the 8 colors that you get, I think you have a good selection. So give them a try. And remember, let me see, I just sharpened this one. If it now works a little bit better. Remember, we had the flow problem that it wasn't really picking up. The color wasn't really flowing too good. That's still. So what I would do with this one is light touch and then just pick up color if I need to for projects, and add a little bit of water on the bottom, pick up some color, and then drag it out. That way you still can use it and it still gives you the watercolor look, but you don't have to worry about those harsh lines, because you can see here when you go directly on the paper, that's just not gonna work. So might be just mine, I don't know. Let me know in the comments below if yours is behaving a little bit different too. But here you can see, if you pick it up directly from the pencil with a little bit of water, you still can use this green with no problem, which I would do then. Instead of coloring it in, I would just add color directly to the image this way, and then just let it dry. And it still gives you a nice green. And again, you can see here, I'm just dabbing the color in. I'm not even going right to the edge. There's white in between. If I think it needs a little bit darker, I can always go a little bit darker on the bottom here. But this is how I would leave it. And you can tell that there was an issue with that one. So If you have a pencil that doesn't behave as the others, where you see too harsh of lines, just pick up some of the color with your brush and a little bit of water directly from your pencil, and then you just start coloring. And if you feel like it's too light, let it dry and then do the same process again. But I think this works fine. And I mean, you can do this with every of your pencils if you feel like that this is easier for you than coloring it in. You just have to make sure that you let them dry once you're done with everything. So this one here, I picked up some, got some brown on them. Pick up some of the orange, and then we could just go in here and color this one in. And again, don't leave a little bit white here and there. Where those lines are, this is kind of like the indicator there should be some shadow, so I'm just putting a little bit darker color underneath there. And then I just leave my carrot like this. So I hope you give it a try. Like I said, there are many ways to use these. Just play around with them. You can see when you overlay colors on top of each other how great they mix. And if you see a little bit of a difference in the color still, like there's a little bit blue shine, I don't mind this. It's tin, so it's like, you know, a little bit weathered. That's fine. If this bothers you, just let it dry, go over with a little bit brown, and you can tell how the darker inside just makes this water can pop, instead of having everything pretty much evened out color wise. There's not much of a difference on lighter and darker shades. I mean, you can see the different colors, but not the lighter and darker shades, so it's all one piece. And compared to this arm and this arm, you can clearly see that this looks a lot more rounder than that one. So I hope this helps a little bit more and gets you going and just trying things out, and don't get discouraged if you're working with these. These are not your regular pencils. You need some practice and it needs time to understand how they work, but they're really a great coloring tool, and I'm gonna use them on some of the images that I use throughout my scrapbooks or cards. So you will see them popping up here and there. And in this case, I'm pretty sure I will just use regular cardstock, but begin with the color swatch, and then make sure you pick something easy to start with. There are lots of different designs in here, so, and you don't have to, I know these are puppies, so they usually should be red or pinkish, but they don't have to. You can use any color you want just to practice and get a feeling on what these can look like and what you can do with those. So there are all sorts of different ones in here, and then you can cut them down and put them on a card. Put a little bit sentiment, like in black, thank you, thinking of you, and send it in the mail. Or put a little bit of cardstock when you cut them down. I mean, these are 6 by 4.5, so if you want to cut them down to, let's say 5.25 by 4, and then you have a 4.25 by 5.5 piece of cardstock, colored cardstock in the background. Put it on a card and then put your little sentiment on there, and you're good to go. All right, well, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you back with more in the next couple days. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye bye.